In New York, on a rainy night, the streets are nearly deserted, their slick reflections under the streetlights creating a heavy, menacing atmosphere. Officers Jake Thompson and Alan Reed patrol in a police car, driving along a quiet road in the neighborhood. Despite the nocturnal calm, the city hides deep-seated tensions that surface in various forms, often through those entrusted to protect its citizens. Jake Thompson, a man with a hard face and a raspy voice, is notorious within the department for his brutal methods and corrupt behavior. His actions leave no doubt about his blatant racism. For years, he has used his badge as a weapon to target the vulnerable, particularly black men, whom he detains without cause. Manipulating the law at will, Thompson feels invincible in his uniform, confident that no one will challenge his abuses. Complaints against him pile up but are often buried, silenced by a complicit system. Alan Reed, younger and less experienced, is his partner. Although not as overtly aggressive as Thompson, Reed does nothing to oppose his colleague. He watches in silence, avoiding confrontation, telling himself it's not his place to question Thompson's authority. His indifference to the abuse of power makes his silence complicit, and he allows himself to be drawn into a spiral of questionable morality. Reed justifies his inaction by reasoning that he isn't the main perpetrator of the violence, but deep down, he knows he is just as guilty for lacking the courage to intervene. That night, under the pouring rain, Jake Thompson and Alan Reed stop Marcus Brown, a plainly dressed man visibly tired after a long day of work. What they don't know is that Marcus is no ordinary citizen. In fact, he is General Marcus Brown, an influential and respected leader in the police force, spearheading several reform initiatives to combat corruption and abuse within law enforcement. However, Marcus is known for his discretion. Despite his high status, he leads a modest life, avoiding attention and traveling without an escort or signs of prestige, in a car that reveals nothing about his rank. Thompson, completely unaware of Marcus's identity, sees in him an easy target, driven by his racial prejudices against black men. Fixing Marcus with a cold stare, he orders him out of the car, immediately accusing him of reckless driving and threatening behavior. The accusations are baseless, but Thompson doesn't care about facts, only about the opportunity to victimize someone he assumes has no way to fight back. Reed, standing beside him, remains silent, observing his colleague act as he always does. Despite his growing discomfort, he once again chooses not to intervene, trapped between his conscience and fear of challenging Thompson's authority. Caught up in his momentum, Thompson takes the humiliation further. He scrutinizes Marcus from head to toe with disdain, looking for any excuse to justify an arrest. "You're in violation, buddy. Do you even know what neighborhood you're in? You've got no business being here," he taunts, hoping to unsettle him. But Marcus doesn't flinch. His imposing stature and calm demeanor stand in stark contrast to Thompson's relentless provocations, which begin to test the officer's patience. Determined to escalate the situation, Thompson demands the vehicle's papers. The luxury car, a stark contrast to Marcus's modest attire, sparks further suspicion. Thompson flips through the documents quickly, letting out a sarcastic laugh. "So, tell me," he sneers, his eyes gleaming with contempt, "where'd you get the money to afford a car like this? Bet you stole it, didn't you?" Marcus, still composed, watches the scene unfold without saying a word. Every insult and accusation only confirms what he already knows about Thompson's behavior. Yet, he reveals nothing, preferring to wait for the right moment. Marcus has witnessed similar situations countless times in his career. His silence, far from being submissive, is a calculated way to gather evidence and assess how far Thompson will go in his abuse of power. Meanwhile, Reed, standing back, feels the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knows the accusation of theft is ridiculous and that Marcus's arrest is pure injustice. Yet, paralyzed by the power dynamic Thompson wields, he remains passive, once again allowing his colleague to spiral deeper into misconduct. He glances at Marcus, wondering how a man can remain so calm in the face of such provocation, still unaware that this humble-looking man is one of the highest-ranking officials in the police force. Thompson, intent on trapping Marcus at all costs, takes his abuse of power to another level. Throwing a smug look at Reed, He orders him to search the car under the false pretext of looking for evidence of criminal activity. Reed, increasingly uncomfortable with the turn of events, obeys without question. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but his fear of defying Thompson keeps him complicit once more. As Reed meticulously searches the vehicle, Thompson seizes the moment to execute a more sinister plan. With a quick, furtive motion, he pulls an illegal firearm from his uniform and plants it in the car's trunk, ensuring the presence of damning evidence. His expression hardens as he prepares to play out the scene he has carefully staged. Reed, unaware of Thompson's deceit, finishes the search and straightens up. It's then that Thompson theatrically bends over the trunk, pretending to discover the weapon he had just planted. "Look at what we've got here," he exclaims triumphantly, holding up the gun for both Reed and Marcus to see. "An illegal firearm. You're under arrest for possession of an illegal weapon." Thompson's words echo through the pounding rain, but Marcus remains unshaken. Though shocked by such a fabricated accusation, he maintains his legendary composure. His self-control, honed through years of experience confronting injustice, shields him from any impulsive reaction. He locks eyes with Thompson, his steely gaze speaking volumes about his thoughts on this absurd charade. "And where are the papers for this weapon?" Marcus asks, his voice calm yet firm. "You know every firearm must have documentation proving its legality. Are you planning to accuse me without tangible evidence?" Marcus's pointed question exposes the inconsistency in Thompson's fabricated narrative. But Thompson, unwilling to be rattled, feigns indignation and frustration. He shrugs with mock innocence. "It's up to you to prove this weapon legally belongs to you. If you can't produce the papers, you're breaking the law," he retorts, as if he holds the upper hand. Reed, who has remained passive until now, begins to grasp the extent of Thompson's corruption. He looks at the weapon, then at Marcus, whose serenity in the face of this farce makes Reed increasingly question the legitimacy of Thompson's actions. The gears in his mind start to turn as he contemplates the potential consequences of the unfolding situation. Yet, despite his doubts, he remains frozen, torn between blind loyalty to his partner and a conscience urging him to act. Meanwhile, Marcus knows he's in a precarious position, but he remains confident. This isn't the first time he's faced corrupt officers, and over the years, he's learned that calm and patience are his strongest weapons. He is not just an ordinary citizen trapped by dishonest cops. He is General Marcus Brown, a man with resources, influence, and sharp strategic intellect. What Thompson and Reed don't yet realize is that this situation could soon turn against them in an unexpected way. As Marcus is handcuffed and roughly shoved into the back of the patrol car, he stays calm despite the tense situation. Seated in the vehicle, he silently observes every movement of Thompson and Reed through the rearview mirror. Beneath his outward tranquility, Marcus's mind is racing. He knows that succumbing to panic would only worsen things. Instead, he methodically plans his counterattack, aware that he has discreet means to turn the situation to his advantage. Taking advantage of a moment when Thompson, engaged in loud conversation with Reed outside the car, is distracted, Marcus subtly moves his hand toward his smartwatch. Under the indifferent gaze of the two officers, he activates a coded message to his trusted colleague, Alex Carter, a high-ranking officer renowned for his integrity and loyalty. Their communication system, designed for emergencies, operates with codes only they can understand, and Marcus knows Alex will respond immediately upon receiving the message. In the brief message, Marcus succinctly outlines the critical situation he's in. He explains that he has been arrested on fabricated charges by Thompson, a corrupt officer. He describes in detail how Thompson planted the illegal firearm in the trunk of his car, a tactic he suspects is part of a broader pattern of misconduct. This detail is crucial, as Marcus knows Alex can take the proper steps to prevent the case from being buried. But Marcus doesn't stop there. Anticipating potential countermeasures from the corrupt officers, he informs Alex of one of his strongest assets: the surveillance cameras integrated into his luxury vehicle. These cameras, discreetly yet effectively placed both inside and outside the car, likely captured everything, including the exact moment Thompson planted the weapon in the trunk. Marcus provides Alex with a detailed description of the camera's locations, ensuring his colleague can retrieve the footage before Thompson or Reed has a chance to tamper with the evidence. With the message sent, Marcus leans back calmly against the rear seat of the patrol car. Despite the handcuffs binding his wrists, his mind is free, calculating, and focused. He knows he has set off a chain reaction that could soon bring Thompson's corrupt world crashing down. The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but Marcus has learned how to exploit their flaws. He waits, patient and serene, confident that Alex's intervention will come swiftly. Meanwhile, Thompson, oblivious to what has just transpired, returns to the patrol car with the same triumphant smile plastered on his face. He believes he has Marcus trapped for good, unaware that his own downfall is imminent. Marcus, watching the scene intently, knows the situation is about to take a decisive turn. At the other end of the city, Alex Carter, alerted by his colleague's encrypted message, is preparing to intervene. He is not just Marcus's colleague, but a trusted ally willing to risk much to expose the truth and put an end to the abuses of power that have tainted the police department. The game has only just begun, and despite his apparent position of weakness, Marcus has already taken the lead in this battle against corruption. While Thompson continues his act of a rigid, upright cop, he remains unaware that every word he speaks, every movement he makes, is being captured by the surveillance cameras installed in Marcus's car. Thompson, still convinced of his impunity, seems to savor the moment, certain that he has total control of the situation. He speaks with arrogance, throwing accusatory insinuations at Marcus, all while pretending to follow protocol. His behavior is a textbook example of abuse of power, but for him, it's just routine. Reed, on the other hand, does not share Thompson's enthusiasm. Ever since he saw Thompson plant the weapon in the trunk, an uneasy feeling has been growing inside him. His hands tremble slightly, and a thin layer of sweat starts to form on his forehead, despite the coolness of the night. Every accusation thrown by Thompson now seems increasingly absurd. He is torn between loyalty to his partner and the growing realization that he is participating in a serious injustice. This hesitation, though silent, does not escape Marcus. Sitting in the car, Marcus watches Reed carefully. He senses the inner struggle, the conflict between what is right and what Reed has been conditioned to do. At that moment, Marcus decides to act. He knows he won't be able to sway Thompson with moral arguments. He is too blinded by his power and prejudices. But Reed shows signs of weakness, and Marcus knows that's where he can find an opening. In a calm and measured tone, Marcus addresses Reed, carefully choosing his words to break through the armor of his silence. "Reed," he begins, his voice calm but laden with meaning. "I know you see what's happening here. You know it's not right. One day, the actions we take, or the silence we keep, will catch up with us." He pauses, catching Reed's evasive glance before adding in a softer voice, "Think about your family. Think about what this could mean for them. This weight, this guilt, you'll have to live with it." Marcus's words hit Reed like a silent punch. He freezes, his mind swirling with emotions. The words resonate deeply within him, and he can't help but think of his wife and 2 children. What would they think of him if they knew he had turned a blind eye to such an obvious injustice? How would he explain to his kids, in a few years, why he didn't have the courage to stand up against such an abuse? The moral conflict boiling inside him becomes suddenly unbearable. He turns his gaze away from Marcus and stares at the floor, his hands clenched on his knees. The silence between them grows heavy with tension, and Marcus knows he has planted the seed of doubt. But he remains calm, letting Reed face his own conscience, knowing that the hardest battle is now being fought in the young officer's mind. Meanwhile, Thompson, too preoccupied with relishing his apparent victory, fails to notice the signs of unease in his partner. He continues to display the weapon he planted, certain that the situation is under his control. "There's no point in arguing," he says to Marcus with a smug smile. "You're going to be spending a long time in prison for this." But in his arrogance, Thompson overlooks a crucial detail. Marcus is not just an ordinary citizen. And, more importantly, injustice never goes unpunished. As the tension rises and Reed continues to wrestle with his conscience, Marcus knows he has moved the pieces. Reed's averted gaze, his tense posture, Everything indicates that something has shifted. The silence is finally broken by Reed himself, who, in a barely audible breath, murmurs, "Thompson, that's enough." Thompson, surprised, spins around. "What?" he asks, incredulous. Reed finally lifts his gaze, his face showing all the accumulated tension. "That's enough, Thompson. What we're doing, it's wrong, and you know it. We can't keep going like this." Thompson, stunned, stares at him for a moment, his expression hardening. "Don't start backing out now, Reed. You know how things work. Are you really going to compromise your career for this guy?" But Reed, despite the fear gnawing at him, knows he's already gone too far to turn back. The internal struggle is over, and for the first time, he stands up to his partner. "I can't," he murmurs, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I can't keep turning a blind eye. It's not right, and you know it." The silence that follows is chilling. Marcus watches the scene unfold, knowing that this moment could mark the beginning of the end for Thompson. Reed, broken but finally freed from his silent complicity, has taken a stand that even Thompson cannot ignore. As Marcus's support team arrives at the scene, the already palpable tension reaches an unbearable level. The flashing lights of the official vehicles illuminate the scene, adding a dramatic touch to the heavy atmosphere filled with impending consequences. Marcus's supervisor, a man with a sharp gaze and imposing stature, steps out of his car, surrounded by several lawyers and members of the Internal Affairs Division. Their presence marks the beginning of the end for Thompson. In the blink of an eye, the situation is assessed. The evidence that Marcus has methodically gathered, including the footage captured by his car's cameras, is immediately reviewed. The images are damning. They clearly show Thompson sliding the illegal weapon into Marcus's trunk, sealing his own fate. The faces of the officers present harden, reflecting the shock and gravity of the act that has just been revealed. Thompson, who until then had stood tall, confident in his superiority, begins to pale. He realizes the situation is slipping from his grasp. The weight of the truth hits him like a guillotine. The lawyers waste no time and begin to question the legality of the search and the fabrication of evidence. The head of Internal Affairs, after reviewing the recordings, orders without hesitation the immediate arrest of Thompson for evidence tampering, abuse of power, and racist conduct. The once arrogant officer is handcuffed in front of his colleagues, his smug expression replaced by one of shock and terror. Reed, meanwhile, remains frozen in the back, his face pale. He knows that his silent complicity can no longer be ignored. However, Marcus's call to his conscience and the dramatic turn of events have profoundly shaken him. When the Internal Affairs investigators turn to him, he knows the moment of truth has arrived. Tired and weary, he decides to cooperate fully. With a hesitant but sincere voice, he reveals everything he knows, describing in detail Thompson's questionable methods and his own passive role in the events of the evening. "I know I didn't speak when I should have," Reed admits, his hands trembling. "But I can't live with this anymore. Everything that happened tonight. It's an injustice. Marcus Brown is innocent." His cooperation is noted, and although he will have to face the consequences of his silence, his decision to speak the truth may mitigate his situation. Meanwhile, Marcus, who had remained dignified and stoic throughout the ordeal, silently observes the scene. He knows that justice, though delayed, is being served. The handcuffs, which had been wrongly placed on his wrists, are carefully removed by one of his support team members. Marcus's supervisor, after exchanging a few reassuring words with him, places a hand on his shoulder. "You did well to keep your composure, Marcus. We have all the evidence we need to close this case." All eyes turn to Thompson, who is escorted to a patrol car, now in the same position that he had unjustly placed Marcus in. The symbolism of this role reversal is not lost on anyone. The corrupt cop, once in a position of power, finds himself trapped by justice. The bitter irony of the situation is emphasized by the heavy silence that hangs over the scene. Marcus, though finally free, feels no unhealthy satisfaction in seeing his oppressor fall. For him, the important thing is that the truth has triumphed, and the abuses of power have been exposed. As he prepares to leave with his colleagues, he exchanges a final glance with Reed, whose face is marked by shame and regret. Reed, Marcus says in a calm but grave voice, "You made the right choice by speaking. I hope you learn the necessary lessons from this." Reed nods silently, unable to respond, but deeply marked by the events. As the night progresses, the rain that had accompanied the beginning of this grim evening begins to subside. The storm, both physical and moral, seems to calm. But for Marcus, this is only one victory in a long battle against systemic injustices.